and the bottom line, we put in a client. We added $150,000 for capex in year one. So what the effect that that's had is that your average rates increase is now sitting at 7.79. So effectively, we've taken 0.17% off. So as we go through and we do any more straw polls, we'll keep bringing this back to you. But the live average rates increase currently is sitting at 7.79%. So thank you, Andrew. If you could switch back to the presentation, I'll take you through the next few slides, and then hand back to Alison. So I won't spend too long on this, but this is obviously the journey that we've all been on collectively together with our community. We started on a very start in November, was 21.7%. We took you through a series of workshops. Some tough decisions were made to get down to 7.8%, which is obviously what we've consulted on. And obviously, when we closed up last Thursday, we were sitting on 7.96%. So I did hear Councillor Cootes during one of the submission hearings remind everyone that it's pretty much the rates increase of 6.2%. That's just inflation. That's just the added depreciation from capex this year, plus continuing to close the non-funded depreciation gap. And as you can see, the 1.3% is additional money, additional rates increases. It's different to the 1.4 because we've now actually recommended taking out that $50,000 for the remission of Maori freehold land rates. You no longer need that. And of course, what we took you through is some additional funding requests that we've heard from the community. So 7.96 is now 7.79. Obviously, those decisions you made this morning, the slides were prepared yesterday. But that's the journey that we've been on. And the labouring point there is, yes, absolutely, without doing anything, the rates increase to 6.2%. So what's changed? So this is really just a recap of what we've done, and as I said, the slide is out of date, and some of our slides will be as you make more decisions. So and when you make anything that changes us again, we'll bring that live score back. So just to step you through it, so it's nice so that everyone is on the same page. Yes, we did consult on a rates increase of right top row, 7.8% is what we went and consulted on. That's rates revenue requirement of $77.2 million, and a capex budget of just over $72 million for next financial year. As I've said, in terms of change of legislation, included in the total rates remission budget was $50,000 for the remission of rates on Maori freehold land. We no longer require that under legislation, so that's available to yourselves. So it's shown there as a budget reduction. We've discussed the Waikana transfer station. That's come out, so that's not an increase. You also talked about the proposal to increase a new fee of a lane hire fee of $1 per swimmer. And we talked about that, and you've asked us to not include that new fee. So that's what's that's done. If we're taking out a fee, we're adding it to rate. So that's $19K. The spectator fee, we actually just consulted on that. We didn't actually put it in the budget, so it was never part of the 7.8%. So there's no impact. That was a try and see. So there's no impact there. And then the capex carryovers. That has changed slightly. So on Thursday, I said to you, so included in on Thursday when I was presenting to you, we actually, what I told you was that included in the 7.8% was already an estimate capex carryover budget of $1.1 million. And in the finance update, and I had a slide to say, look, since then, in the passage of time, staff have already identified that they're probably going to carry over another $1.9 million of the current year's program into next year. But as we've been running the financial models, because we're under pressure with audit, they want all the changes and stuff, we've actually realised that actually the one project for $771,000, which is our self-insurance fund for capex, we did actually include that in the draft number because we thought. We just took the estimate that we weren't going to have an uninsured loss by 30th June. So So that 1.2 is actually, I'd said to you it was 1.9. It's actually 1.2 because we actually included 1.8 in our draft budget of 7.8. So we included that self-insurance fund for CapEx. But what we're flagging to you is that we think overall we're probably going to have about $3 million worth of CapEx carrying over into next year. And then that 60K is for the safety improvements to Parapara College School. So where we end up with is, according to this slide, and I spoke to you about growth. So we've planned for growth of 0.9%, and we believe we're going to be a bit stronger than that. We believe that we're going to land as close to 1.1% as possible. You know that it actually came up at the strategy and ops. Why is it that our rates revenue is always slightly higher? It's because we set the rates just before the end of the year, and sometimes we get some properties become rateable just before 30 June. So we do think that we have a high chance of making 1.1. So that means growth is a bit higher. And so bottom line there, obviously the amount of money that we need to recover from rates has gone up. That slide is $123,000 too high. And then the CapEx of 73.3 million. Don't forget, we've just increased that by 150,000. That's fine. We can accommodate that. We've got the financial strategy caps us at $80 million per annum for CapEx. So we're still within our financial strategy limits. But that's a snapshot. We're not sitting at 7.96%. Right now we're at 7.79. But that's what's changed since we went out for consultation. So insurance, unfortunately, I've got some bad news, but it's still good. So we received our invoices from Aon. Look, I'll cut straight to it. We don't believe we don't have a potential saving there of $450,000. We think that's going to be probably more likely to be either somewhere between $280,000 and $300,000. What's happened is we actually received the actual physical invoices from our broker yesterday, and the numbers that we've been talking about and discussing together have actually excluded EQC and fire service levies, which is we pay quite a lot on fire service levies, particularly for our above ground asset and for our above ground assets, and on our residential portfolio, the GST under the tax rules, we can't actually claim the GST back, so it's an expense. So basically, there's about $100,000 that have come through by way of an invoice, and it's the GST that we have to pay on our older person's housing portfolio. It is the fire service levies; they go up, and EQC costs. The other thing that's come into the fold is that Wayne and I have been fighting our syndicate for 6 years because insurance renewals were always November to November, and we sort of said, well, that's, we need to realign that because effectively we always go into a financial year quite uncertain. We'll make an estimate of what we think the insurance premium is going to be, and we've always been wanting to push it back to May or earlier. So last year we actually won the fight and actually managed to have a renewal date of May, so which meant that we went into our annual plan with one of our most expensive policies having certainty, but everything else was November. So because the market's getting tougher, we've been working hard, and we've actually been able to align all our renewal dates to May, so that going forward we've got certainty. But what's coming through is a bit of a wash-up in terms of the timing of the invoices because it's November to mid-November. So there's just a couple of things that we're working through with Aon. It's still good news. We've still done some fantastic work. We've looked at our asset portfolio. We've decided there's a whole lot of assets that we're paying heavy premiums on that we shouldn't really need to insure. We still have a strategy. I'm still going to come back and take you through it. But the bottom line is there isn't 450. It's in the order of 300, possibly 280. There's still a little bit of devil in the detail that we've got to work through with Aon. We are talking to them, and we're having an urgent meeting with them on Friday. So yes, the recommendation from us to you is still exactly the same. If it's 280 or it's 300,000, we strongly recommend that we retain it, that you don't use it to reduce rates. and we start building up that self-insurance fund, and we start stepping through our insurance strategy to put us in a real position of strength going forward. So I think there was, just on Thursday night, there was just a comment that, you know, we're just focusing heavily on year one. What about years 2 and 3? Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll take questions. Yes, absolutely. I've only got a few slides, so.
Can you just explain the fact we can't claim GST, because that I can't get my head around that.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, this is where I need my tax expert. Look, there's been. If I get this wrong, I will check my answer and come back to you if I've got it wrong. But there has been a recent change to some tax legislation that GST on residential properties can't be reclaimed as an input tax. So we just have to pay it. We can claim back the GST on commercial property. We can claim it back on underground assets, just not residential. If we've got property that's used for residential purposes, it can't be claimed back. It's an expense. It's yeah. So it's a recent change, and it's been there for a couple of years. When I say recent, it was about 2-3 years ago they changed it, but it does catch us out from time to time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I've actually had my light on since before Mark's was talking, and so I'm actually going backwards. So before we broke, we were talking about slide 14, and on there are a number of items, and only one item was spoken to, and only one straw poll was taken. So there are a number of items on here that we also need to cover. So whether we do that, you know, whether we finish this section and go back, but I'm just highlighting the point that they haven't been covered. So it's my understanding today is actually we've had an opportunity to go away and rethink about things, and so that's what we're doing today. So I think in relation to the transfer station, that was quite clear on Thursday. So yeah, so I'm just saying that after Mark has maybe finish this section, I'd like to go back and cover off these other items on this page here, page 14. Thank you.
You're losing Rob in 10 minutes.
So shall we just park it?
Actually, Mr. Mayor, may I suggest that we'll do exactly the same thing, but we'll put the live score, the spreadsheet on. It's got exactly the same numbers, because you're looking at something that's slightly out of date, and you can go line by line, and you can do your straw poll. Because if you say no or yes, we can change the spreadsheet so you can actually see the impact. Give us a couple of minutes, we'll do the changeover.
I disagree with the
Param College one, because it's education funding, it's roading funding. I don't think it's something that ratepayers should be funding extra. I don't see that in the whole time I was chair of the road safety that we would have to bring decisions like this through the LTP. I'm actually not in favour of the two that we're not even consulted on.
Yep. This was for the footpath that was going down the side of Paraparaumu College, the safety thing with the kids going over the bridge being very unsafe, and a very small impact on rates. I support that. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, Councillor Elliott, looks like you're the only one who's objecting to that. So, clear steer on that one. So, by exception, anything else? Anybody else? Councillor Pravanov.
Thank you. So I have a couple of questions in relation to the Social Investment Fund and for the Otaki community and the youth space. These came in the last minute. So I'm just asking for some clarity around how these are going to operate and how they are going to be overseen to ensure that the work is actually being done.
McDougall.
Thank you. Morena, through you, Mr Chair. The proposal to increase the social investment budget by $50,000 specifically tagged to Otaki was designed to address feedback across a range of submissions that there were equity issues in Otaki that required addressing. So how that would work is that the social investment fund would be increased by $50,000. That would be tagged specifically to Otaki, but what needs it would be used to address, what outcomes it would be used to seek, would be considered and developed alongside the usual process for agreeing the social investment priorities. In terms of the proposal from elected members to fund $50,000 for a youth space of some kind in Otaki, I imagine that would look a little bit like getting alongside youth and other core service providers in Otaki to explore how that funding could be used to best effect.
Thank you.
Right. Anything else by exception? Councillor Elliott.
Yeah, just on the same too, I think that the Social Investment Fund and it's ended up being called the Otaki College Social Investment Fund. I believe that going back to discussion on those, that it was very, very confusing as to who was seeking what and what aims and outcomes would be coming out of them, and I think it's a ripe opportunity for a feasibility study for starters and nothing else in year one, and that going forward, perhaps year 2 or 3, during the annual planning process, something more concrete would come out of it. And unfortunately, I think the effort continuously to create equity for Otaki has actually created complete and utter inequity for the rangatahi and the kids from the whole rest of the district. An example of this is 900k being given to an Otaki Hapu group for a youth program for 6, 7 or 8 youth. It's over 100,000 each. I hope they're getting a car and a house deposit in that.
Any staff comment on that?
Can I just ask, that money, that's not council money, is it? That's government money, is that correct? So it doesn't impact on our rates at all?
No.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's right. So that's your opinion. I don't see any great objections to that. Councillor Cox.
Just because I love even numbers, what would it take to get it up to 7.8? Could we add something extra into the use space for Otaki or something?
We will use Swedish rounding.
Apart from those issues has been raised, Councillor Bravanov.
So just following up on Councillor Compton's comment, I think previously we've heard that there is quite a lot of inequity in Waikanae as well, and maybe if it is increased, then it should go somewhere else in the district, like Waikanae. Thank you.
Okay, look, there doesn't seem to be any other issues. Generally, there's agreement to what we've direction that we've given.
So through you, Mr. Mayor. So my next slide is just really showing you the rates increase year on year across the life of the long-term plan, and you'll know that when we consulted, year 2 was 8.2 and year 3 was 8.5. So we run quite sophisticated modelling, and we're running the modelling and putting these changes through, working with our auditors. And look, what we discovered is, in terms of the financial strategy, our borrowings is the preferred limit is below 280%. You know that for some of the years we can go to 300%, but we're deliberately retaining some headroom just for unforeseen events. And with some of the changes that we made to CapEx, we actually got really close to that 280%, almost to the point where we could have breached it. So we've just been working internally, looking at the CapEx program, and just rephasing some of that CapEx. Also, the impact of the carryovers coming over meant we had to just reshuffle. So the impact of just smoothing some of the CapEx work in the out years has meant, obviously, savings on depreciation and interest. So that's why we've dropped down to 7.9 and 8%. But that just gives you a flavour of the. That's what the. Hopefully you do adopt a long-term plan on the 24th of June, and that long-term plan has those are the rates increases over the next 20 years. And as you know, as we go through our annual plan round, things do change.
Mr. Jackson.
Mark, we're hearing a lot of rhetoric at the moment about increases in inflation. What sort of assumptions have you taken in inflation?
So just through you, Mr. Mayor. Look, in terms of our assumption, we will obviously apply in terms of our financial modelling. We use the indices as supplied by Bill. Now, some of the indices are specific to our industry, and ones that aren't, we use LGCI. So what we've done is we've used. So overall inflation is 3.6%, but we do use for roading and concrete and all that kind of steel, there are specific indices that we apply into our financial model. But where there isn't something specific, we use a composite index for local government, and that's 3.6%. So we apply that across the board, and so we do have inflation. So the numbers that we publish are all inflated, but it's driven by Burl, which all councils across the country follow Burl's advice. So and it is audited by our auditors.
Presumably 3.6 is year 1. It can vary over the years, and likely does, and then sort of sets more of a flat line in the out years, does it?
Yes, that's right. So yes, thank you, Wayne. So that's year 1. But they're forecasts. So what happens is every single year. So it's all different. So and what we're required to do is we're required to publish our forecast assumptions. So within our LTP documentation, we set out what our inflation indices are across the 20 years. But Burl actually provide updated reports in August each year, and so part of the annual planning round is, and we do this year on year. So we set a long-term plan for 20 years, and then what we do is when we start to develop the annual plan for year 2, we start off with the Burl report, which will be a revised inflation index, so it'll either be higher or lower. and it also revises its forecasts for the out years. So we each and every year when we set either a long-term plan or an annual plan, we are using the most up-to-date inflation forecasts.
So that's a constant reset.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is, Mr. Mayor. And look, it's not numbers that we come up with, so it is provided by an independent organisation.
Councillor Compton.
Just through the Mayor, picking up on the inflation question, when this goes into the final long-term plan document, do we have a stab at adding the inflation portion on those out years, or?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, look, absolutely. So the published, so we normally sit around a table and we talk about the uninflated numbers so that you can see whether or not, year on year there's been a, big cost increase and the rationale for that. But in terms of the published document, they're all inflated. So when people have a look and want to know what their budgets are, they're inflated.
Just to clarify that we're obliged to do that, and that is why the whole sector uses a consistent CPI indicator done independently, because if we all had a go at coming up with our own numbers, we might well, be accused of influencing those numbers, big or small.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to, just picking up on that again as well. Look, I just noticed, obviously, we've got inflation, on the first three parts of the in the browny colour, dark brown, but there's none anywhere else on that graph. I was just wondering why that's not shown.
I did ask that question because it's a bit of a frustration, but Mark will explain it to you. But in those out years, to separate it out from the various cost categories, they assure me becomes too hard to say it was this much. So they tend to not do it because it's a little bit misleading. I think where you're driving at is that's a little confusing. If you have built it in, why isn't it showing on top? Yeah.
It's not. Well, I guess what I'm referring to, it's not going to come on top. So it's
it is.
It is
in there.
Increase,
it is.
General remaining portion. Is that right?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, and that's a good point. So something we work on.
Oh, yeah, no, that's cool. Look, I had two other questions. Look, one of them relates to the closing depreciation gap. I was just looking through some of the older annual reports. It said in the years 18-19 that we dropped down to from 5.1 to $3.9 million gap, and then in 1920 we dropped from 3.9 down to 800,000 or thereabouts. We didn't do anything last year, but I noticed that we've got, so I would have thought we only had about 1.5% to go on that, but according to this, we've got about another 4.5%.
Councillor, I don't think that last number was right. I think we dropped by 800,000 in the year, not to 800,000.
Oh, it's pretty clear.
We didn't take out 2.5 million worth of closing the gap in any year.
3.1 according to the book.
Yeah, we did. That's the cumulative effect. On an annual basis, we're still underfunding by a lot. There's a couple of things to bear in mind. Every time our depreciation comes in more than what we rate funded, it adds back to that number. And that's why there's so much work going on in that space, because every year we've had between 200 and 500,000 of extra depreciation that we never rate funded, so it goes back on top. So this whole just, it's a bit like that muddy pool down at the beach. Every time you think you've dug a bit out, it starts, this is the opposite. It keeps getting a little bit worse. And so our non-funding has been going down by the agreed amount, but sometimes where we've taken 700,000 or 800,000 out, we've added back 200,000. So it's still got another, I think, 3 to 5 years to go to get there.
So would that mean that this will be an ongoing issue?
Or is it?
For all of those years it is, yes. Once we get there, we then need to create a small surplus, which starts paying down. You've heard Councillor Coote make reference to about $50 million worth of accumulated debt caused by that. We will then take the next 1.5 million years to pay that off to zero at a small amount of, notionally I think we've got $250,000 or $500,000 a year to pay that down over the following years as part of dealing with the debt profile.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to add that Wayne was absolutely correctly. By not doing anything this year, that has kicked us out 2 years, so it's 5.
And I guess, the last question was just looking at the actual depreciation. It's increased obviously it's increasing quite significantly there. Is that due to our CapEx program and the depreciation that will be incurred in that being brought on into the books at that point?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. It's driven by two things. Number one, it is the CapEx program. So every time we create an asset, that creates depreciation, but it's also a revaluation. So we have a policy of revaluing our assets because under accounting standards, you must reflect your assets at fair value. And we're anticipating, we have had over the last 6 years, significant uplift in our value of our assets. Mainly, just basically it's costing more and more to build, and so that's reflected in unit rates. So there's two factors. It's new assets that we're building or renewing, but it's also revaluation. It's our assets are basically the value of the assets are going up, and so when you revalue an asset upwards, that increases its depreciation. Because quite often what we do is our assets go up in value, but their remaining useful life stays the same, and so that increases your annual depreciation.
And sorry, just for clarity for mine, do they go up in value, or are we just talking about the replacement cost that's sort of going up?
We actually do both. So your depreciation is driven by the fair value of the asset, which is what we often call optimised depreciated replacement cost. So the valuers have a look at what is your asset, what would it cost if you built that same asset today, but then they do an adjustment to reflect that that's not a brand new asset. So, like for example, the assets that we do this year, they're really new. So the valuers will say, well, that's what it costs. That's the valuation. But some of our assets that, for example, are 15 years old, they have a look at all of those assets and they'll go, well, if we replace that today, that's what it would cost. But it's actually 15 years old, so we do an adjustment.
Thank you.
So moving to the next slide, this is just a capital works program. Again, just giving you a clear line of sight of what it's looking like over the next 20 years. This is what will be in the long-term plan. And so key points there is that we know that over the next 3 years that on average we'll be spending $77 million on our capital works program. We've got a $73 million program. 10-year capital expenditure is $639 million, and the average annual spend over the next 20 years is $72 million. So that's what it looks like. We're just showing the difference between upgrades and renewals. So upgrades are, the simplest form of upgrades are new assets, and renewals are replacing existing assets.
Yes. Oh, maybe. Well, so NZTA have been working through the Waka Kotahi have been working through the mediation process around setting the NLTF to feed into the RLTP, which will then feed into our LTP. For roading, and we got a notification yesterday. Basically, we put a bid in for 32 million over the next 3 years. That's for all of our maintenance-related activities, operational and renewals, so footpaths, bridge repairs, all of that stuff that actually NZCA have defined that as on an ongoing sort of committed work program. So you are guaranteed funding, but they don't confirm the exact extent of that funding until they work through that moderation process. So we asked for 32. We've been told we're getting 24.7, so over 3 years. So we're going to have to work through now what does that mean in terms of detail. We haven't been provided with the breakdown as to what makes up the 24 million, but obviously that's going to impact on the work program. We get this scenario every time we go through this process because the timing of the NLTF doesn't align with the LTP, so they don't actually lock in the final decisions until August, and they do have historically they always sort of differ slightly. This year is probably a larger difference. The government have been indicating for the last few months that there's going to be an issue in terms of their ability to fund as much of the work program that they have seen coming down from councils and their own work program in terms of the state highways. So at the moment we're looking at what does that mean in terms of detail. Because it's a bulk funded revenue for them, we're able to move a lot of that. We're able to move it around within the 3 years. So what we're looking at the moment is we probably won't change anything. We won't change anything in year 1, but we will end up having to change things in years 2 and 3, and that would mean either council making up the shortfall in terms of meeting the subsidy deficit, or reducing the work program basically over the last 2 years of the LTP, RLTP. So at the moment we know there's about an $8 million shortfall. We need to do more work to determine what that actually relates to, and the impacts will be in years 2 and 3. At the moment, we haven't had confirmation of our low cost, low risk, which is another work category. So that's the category that we use to fund the minor safety improvements in those projects. So the Raumati Road roundabout, those sorts of projects, they're under $1 million. They don't require a specific business case, and they're funded through that low risk, low cost activity area. So we've put a bid in for 5.2 or 5.3 million for that over 3 years. So we're yet to find out what that number looks like. And that again will have similar consequences. It would potentially mean we continue with year 1, but years 2 and 3 would look significantly different if that's reduced. And we haven't heard back on the link road. So there's another work activity which is significant projects, and I think it's anything over 5 million that's in that grouping. And again, we haven't heard back on that project, and that's the project that sits within the RLTP in terms of the priority listing for something of sort of semi-regional significance.
So I think flagging this to you is this is yet another example of a really, really significant impact caused by government decisions. And we can sit here and listen to them say very logically, well, the fund is only this big, we've only got this much money. The government has poured a whole lot into rail, into safety initiatives and all sorts of wonderful things, and said, so you guys can suffer. Now, this is at the same time as they're saying to the whole sector, you're not spending enough on maintaining your assets. And so I think the whole sector is going to have a lot to say about this. I was told something like a 20% increase in funding requests across the country, and around about a 0% ability to increase the funding to councils. So we've got a bit more than we had in the last 3 years, but a little bit more. So I think the real disconnect between them saying, look after your assets better, and by the way, we'll give you less money, is very significant. If that's a 3-year package, so the Ministry of Transport is currently looking at funding options to do things differently, and they've said, we've got 3 years to do that, there's no rush, there's plenty of money in the funding package. What you've just heard is there isn't. So once again, I kind of go, this is a government disconnecting itself from reality and working in 2 completely different work streams, affecting us immediately and significantly. And I do not believe this is where we step up and fill the gap at our ratepayers' expense. I do believe it's where the sector needs to get busy, but of course we've been hammered by Three Waters, by RMA, by Future for Local Government. So I just want you to be really aware that, you know, whilst we're worrying about the potholes on the road, we've actually got really significant issues that we're going to have to work on in the next 6 to 12 months in this space.
I suspect what they will tell us in terms of solutions to give the road sector.
So a cynic would say, yep, this is all aimed at at a future. They are not that strategic. I do not think. I know some of them.
I think Councillor Elliott was first. I just jumped the queue.
So no, it's on Capital Works program. Okay, go for it. I'll be after you.
Thanks, Jackie. Sean, can you just clarify, this is different to our FAR rate, the funding assistant rate, because I'm sure that was confirmed a wee while back. So we've retained that, but this is more around the bulk funding.
Yes. This is the bulk, the biggest area of funding with regard to transport is in this continuous program of work, which is our maintenance and renewals activities. So yeah, this is in that space, and it's, as Wayne said, everybody is seeing a reduced investment level across the country. So regionally, I think Pororua got about just over half of what they'd asked for. Wellington City have got a significant reduction in terms of what they'd asked for. Most of them do go up from what they've had previously. So we went from 21 million over the last 3 years to 24 million. So there's an increase there. But the area that we'd focused on is basically when we were audited, Waka Kotahi said that we should make sure that we're investing further in our asset management approach around roading rebuilds and dig up work because of the risk for future costs associated with not doing that. So yeah, it does seem a bit at odds that we're doing basically what we were instructed to do through that audit process, and we've been knocked back, I guess, in terms of the request for funding. And I assume it'll be the same for the state highways. You would expect in terms of their level of funding as well over the next 3 years.
So the second question is how, and I've obviously just heard about this in the last couple of days, how does it, or does it impact on our ability to respond to the Road to Zero and also the mode shift program?
Because we don't know the areas of detail in terms of which areas haven't got as much funding, we don't know yet whether that. So maybe that the safety and the Road to Zero, those areas stay the same, but some of those other activity classes like the footpaths, bridges, reseals, renewals, that may have been reduced. That might be where that funding's come from. So when we get more detail, we'll be able to come back to council and give you a breakdown of what that actually means, because it will affect the work program in year 2.
Interesting to note, and I know the detail, we're not yet aware of it, but footpaths featured quite heavily through the submissions and the need to do more. Wayne, you'd made a comment around the sector responding, but then you also provided a little proviso around everything else that's been thrown at them. But are you expecting there to be a sector response to central government?
Oh, look, just based on our own reaction, and you've heard that some councils are really badly affected, so I strongly expect there'll be a big push. But there, it's in the context where there's a lot going on. I meant to add, when you think about things like the NZ Up program with $12 billion of expenditure, these sorts of things are putting price pressure on available suppliers as well. So projects are getting more expensive at the same time as there is a bigger work program that everyone's trying to do, at the same time as they're saying, and we will not give you funding outside of the hypothecated funds. So complicated area where they're hiding behind, if you like, their own policies rather than saying, oops, we better solve the problem now. So yeah, and if they don't, I can assure you that I hope we will.
Yeah, thanks. Look, this the sheer size of those figures up on the screen and this conversation we've just had and what we've just heard absolutely segues into what I'm going to ask, and that is, do we want to reprioritise previous council decisions on the Gateway? We made decisions 3 years ago to proceed with that project and put it on the LTP based on the information we had at the time, and being an LTP process that we're in again now, it is perfectly legitimate and defendable to reprioritise where we want to spend, how we want to spend, what we have to spend on, and how much our ratepayers can cope with paying at this particular time. We've had the latest projections from government out just last week saying that they expect 3 to 5 years before any sort of off-board, offshore tourism will be back to anything like normal. It's a long window, and personally, I'm not feeling pressured to do the Gateway at this time anymore. I'm really not, and I'd like councillors to consider that when you're doing an LTP, you look at reprioritising previous decisions, and it's really important and fair that we do, especially when the public lose little facilities and services like the Waikonai recycling facility, over 123k, and we have numbers like 2.23 mil sitting there on a project that is actually excess to needs.
A couple of points. The first thing is, it would be a very strange thing for us to put this on the table and make another decision about it today with no information, staff haven't had a chance to work it into any kind of modelling. It's very late in the piece to be to be considering this if we decided to. The second thing is I'd like to ask a question. As it's a decision that we've made recently, would we need a 70% vote to overturn it? And the third thing is, no, we don't usually relitigate all our big projects through the long-term plan process. Not the ones that we've already confirmed. It's we don't usually go through. We're not going through our entire budget lines and reassessing every big project that we're doing. I don't think that's not the long-term plan process I've been involved in before.
Councillor Coates.
Probably more a simple question. Has the project already started?
Also, I think it's capital expenditure. The impact on the rates is what?
Nothing in terms of next year's budgets, but you're right. That's CapEx versus OpEx. Those two comparisons, so they're quite different. Our contribution is looking to be largely in the land and stream rehabilitation space, which also effectively won't create much in the way of depreciation. It's land. But no, the project's underway. I'd have to get back to you about any decision making, but more to the point, we've got contractual arrangements already in place with the likes of the PDU. So yeah.
Well, that's a moot point then. No need to get back to me.
Talking about contractual obligations, there's a political contract. Natalia, would you like to comment on that? Oh, I'm just signalling that there is a political contract involved in that. No.
Yeah. You're right. Political contract. The iwi. I can't remember the lady's name. No, the iwi who spoke about the gateway. The gateway. They wanted cleaning of that stream, and cleaning of the stream means reducing the bacteriological quality of that stream. And I don't see anything on the what council is proposing, maybe chopping down a tree and allowing more sunlight into that stream, how that's going to improve the bacteriological quality of that stream.
Just to be clear, stream rehabilitation is a part of the project, and so if you withdraw that funding, we won't have funding to do that part of that project. So I'm just responding, saying the Gateway project does include that. You said cutting down a tree, which was quite emotive language. What I'm saying is the project includes stream rehabilitation down at that end.
Right, you all can have an offline chat about who remembered what.
Yeah, can stream mitigation still occur without the Gateway project, considering we're just launching a project to clean up the entire wharamuku and no one's asking for a budget for that?
So as I've explained, the works down at that bottom end is included in the Gateway project. So we haven't contemplated needing to do anything different because that has been an agreed and approved project, which includes that work. And that is a lot of what our contribution is going towards.
No other comments on that? Next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. So this just shows us the, this is basically the projected borrowings across the long-term plan. Most importantly, you can see, I guess the key point there is, in terms of the financial strategy, we have said that our upper limit is 280% net debt to operating revenue. And you can see the most important thing is we're not going above the black line, grey line, top line. And as you see towards the end of the long-term plan, most importantly what we've said is we want to be below the green line, so back to our 200%. So we're going to go up and above so that we can invest for resilience and growth over those few years, and then slowly but surely get back to our 200%. So we're by no means going right up to the 300% mark. And again, it's all about just creating headroom for any unnecessary expenses. So that's the borrowings profile. It's compliant with the proposed financial strategy. And that's the end of the financial overview. So happy to take any more questions on that before we hand over to Alison.
Just had a question that went back to the self-insurance fund, and I think it's just more important for you to clarify it with us so that there's a clear understanding. I didn't know the answer myself, so that's me included. Last week there was a discussion around how much is in that self-insurance fund, and so aside from the amount that we're topping it up, because that's yet unconfirmed, it might just be helpful to clarify how much is actually existing in that self-insurance fund.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So, look, everything being equal, touch wood, we don't use it. So there's $300,000 of OPEX sitting in an equity account, and in terms of the CAPEX. So every year we rate fund $150,000 for uninsured operating losses, and we provide a budget provision for $250,000 of uninsured CAPEX losses. So in terms of OPEX, there's $300,000 for the last 2 years, touch wood. We haven't needed to use those funds. And then on the CAPEX side, there's $771,000.
Thank you. Through the Mayor, just on that LTP borrowings slide, I noticed in 25-26, we get right up snug to the 280% line. I'm assuming that are we right on it there, or are we sort of a few percent down? What's the actual net figure that we reach? Well, that's why I was sort of wondering, because it's very snug to it, and I've sort of noticed through this, it's been progressively more snug to that line as we've gone through. So I'm just wondering what the exact figure in terms of the percentage is.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. I'd need to come back, Councillor. Exactly, it is right there, and we did actually go over that line tickle, which is why we've had to just smooth the work program, which is why year 2 has gone from 8.2 to 7.9, and year 3 has gone from 8.5 down to 8. So it's had an impact. Just like everything, you know, it's easy for the team, but it's quite a sophisticated model, and we did go over the limit that the councillors set of 280, but it's very close. And with carryovers and stuff, like we do estimate every year, there will be some reason to carry over, so it will change, but I will come back to you. The most important point, it's not breaching the 280.
I'd just like to add, for example, you've already heard this morning of potentially $8 million worth of NZ Waka Kotahi funding that we won't get. That would translate to probably $15 plus million worth of expenditure, probably, that all things being equal, we wouldn't spend, that is in that budget. And that's the reason I'm explaining that to you, is just an example of how things change. Even before we've landed this plan, our world keeps changing. If you recall, what we committed at the beginning of this process was, as we go through annual plans, we will be making adjustments as we learn new bits of information. We wanted to show that signal to the community that the significant program in the early years moves us up that curve, but that we don't want to get that close. So I would expect, as always, when we don't quite deliver all the things and other parts of the world have changed, that we would be working to go a little bit below that.
So I just thought we'd take this opportunity just to show you a few pages from the document that the designers have done for us, just to give a bit of a look and feel for what will be coming to you on the 24th. So we have tried to flow through from the consultation document and draw links through different images and illustrations, as well as the text. So the front page is looking pretty similar to the consultation document. The welcome page, so this is just to show, so we're using the same navigation tool through the way through, so there'll actually be external tabs, so it's easier to find, but all through using the use of colours and icons.
Sorry to interrupt, is it supposed to be in a foreign language? French. Oh, is it French?
It's because we haven't put the text in yet. Yeah,
Okay,
so they're just holding places for the text because we're still writing that at the moment.
Multicultural system. Council version.
Good that you pick up your things out.
And so the contents page, not particularly exciting, but another way just to show that we're doing the same sort of navigation throughout the document. the community outcomes, so it's the same as the CD, so double page spreads for people to get the full picture as they work through. So that's just showing the community outcomes, the icons flowing through, and it's also drilling down. There was that next level of information that councillors put together through the workshop, so that's coming forward into the final long-term plan, so it goes in more depth about the community outcomes. And then this is just showing, so the activity management sections are quite different than what we've seen in the past, and there's going to be a bit more narrative around them, and clearly linking back to what we've heard through consultation through our major projects and initiatives that are coming through, and then all the statutory requirements that we need to have in there as well. But of note is every, so as you know, there's clusters and there's activity that sit under each cluster. So each activity has its own whakatauki that we've put alongside it to show the ongoing partnership with mana whenua and how everything that we're doing is flowing through the work that we're doing. So that's something different than what we've done before. I think that's, yep, so that's the end of the sample. There's a lot of work going on in the background. And then so next steps, just revising what we took you through on Thursday. So by the end of Thursday, all of the financials and supplementary information have gone to Ernst & Young auditors. Early next week, we're sending off all the narrative and activity summaries. The 14th, it goes to the OAG. So EY have confirmed to me today that we'll send it to them on the 8th. They'll get feedback to me on Friday the 11th, and then June the 14th, it's going to the OAG. So there'll be a turnaround over the weekend. And then on the 18th, the agenda is sent to council. As mentioned, it may be that the actual LTP documents come out separate to the agenda. We'll try for that not to happen, but we may need that last weekend just to get everything looking as great as it can. On the 24th, we'll be looking at the remaining fees and charges, so everything other than regulatory, adopting the LTP and then setting the rates. And then from the 1st of July, everything kicks into action, including the wrap-up engagement. So there'll be an interim step with wrapping up from adoption as far as telling the community where we've landed, but from 1 July it'll be where we really kick off with all the information that we're pulling together. Bit of a debrief. And also just for next steps, just picking up on the conversation we had this morning about potentially having a smaller group of councillors to help with the reviewing of the text, particularly around the key decisions, would be very useful.
Alison, we had a really good session one year when we went through the submitter response letters and we actually helped put wording together for those. So are you proposing that that sort of thing would happen again?
There isn't a plan to take all of elected members through the responses, no. As we've talked about before, the only submitters that are getting those individual responses are the ones that submitted outside of Engagement HQ, so those specific ones that we went through on Thursday that put forward separate proposals. So they will be getting individual responses worked out by staff. All the other submitters will receive the generic feedback that's going out to community in the shape of the response feedback form, the same as what the consultation feedback form was like.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm happy to put my hand up to help looking at the wording.
Right. Nothing else. So that brings us to the end of this session. Janice, you've got.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this afternoon we have a briefing with you, a briefing in the style of a workshop around the representation review. And we are doing the same session for community board members later in the afternoon, early in the evening. Just a request, if you could take your belongings with you into the councillors' lounge over lunchtime, because we will be resetting the room and changing the layout quite significantly, and that'll be much easier if we don't have bags and coats and things like that to be working our way around. So if you could do that, that would be great. Thank you. And for ward councillors who are appointed back to community boards, they are the same workshops, so it is not our expectation that you would be here for 2 workshops today.